He was a former Air Force rescue operator, hiding in the frozen mountains of Washington. A man haunted by a missing plane, a mother and son he had failed to bring home, and a distress signal that vanished without a trace. Then a wounded German shepherd appeared at Ethan Cole's cabin door, carrying a torn strap marked NB. The dog led him beyond Frostline Pass, into a valley no rescue team had searched. There, beneath 18 months of snow, Ethan found the missing plane and 2 survivors. But when he called the commander he once trusted, he made a deadly mistake. The men coming up the mountain were not coming to save them. They were coming to silence them. 18 months before the wounded German shepherd reached his door, Ethan Cole had stood beneath the spinning blades of a rescue helicopter and watched hope disappear into a wall of snow. Now he lived alone, 12 miles outside Winthrop, Washington, in a weathered cedar cabin pressed against the eastern edge of the North Cascades. At 39, Ethan still looked like the man the Air Force had once trusted to enter places other people were desperate to escape. He stood 6'2", with broad shoulders, a lean waist, and the controlled balance of someone trained to move across unstable ground. His dark brown hair was cut short, with no concern for style, and several days of stubble usually covered his angular jaw. A narrow scar ran from beneath his left ear toward the collar of his flannel shirt, the result of a helicopter cable snapping during a mountain extraction 8 years earlier. His gray-blue eyes were the part people remembered. They were steady without being warm, observant without appearing curious. Since the failed search, they seemed permanently fixed on something beyond the room. The cabin reflected the discipline Ethan could not turn off. Firewood was stacked by size. Emergency supplies were labeled by date. His climbing ropes were cleaned, dried, and coiled, even though no one had asked him to rescue anyone in more than a year. He checked the locks every night, recorded the temperature before sunrise, and walked the tree line after each storm to inspect weakened branches. Routine gave him something solid to hold. Silence filled everything else. On a shelf beside the wood stove sat an old emergency radio. Its casing was scratched, one corner dented from years of field use, but the receiver still worked. Ethan kept it tuned to the frequency assigned to Flight 72 Kilo, the aircraft that had carried environmental scientist Claire Bennett and her 15-year-old son, Noah. Claire had been 40 when the plane disappeared. In the photograph supplied to the rescue team, she had chestnut hair cut to her shoulders, intelligent brown eyes, and the composed expression of a woman accustomed to explaining dangerous truths to people who preferred not to hear them. Her research concerned contaminated water near protected federal land, though Ethan had never been told why she and Noah were being transported under quiet government protection. Noah's file photograph had shown a thin boy with dark curls, wire-framed glasses, and an uncertain half-smile. He looked younger than 15, but notes from the protection detail described him as mechanically gifted, intensely observant, and fiercely attached to his mother. Ethan had never met either of them. He had still promised himself he would bring them home. The aircraft's last distress signal had lasted 11 seconds. A pilot reported severe icing. A second voice mentioned navigation interference. Then came a burst of static and silence. Ethan had helped coordinate the northern search sector. For 9 days, helicopters, ground teams, tracking dogs, and snowmobiles worked through deteriorating weather. On the 10th day, commanders announced that new radar analysis placed the aircraft beneath Blackwater Lake, where shifting ice and extreme depth made recovery impossible. The operation ended. Ethan never accepted the conclusion. The lake search had produced no fuel sheen, no floating debris, and no emergency locator signal. More troubling, the final radar reconstruction did not match the wind recorded that night. Ethan raised the discrepancy twice. Both times, he was told the data had been reviewed above his clearance level. 3 months later, he left operational service. 14 months after that, he was still listening. A sudden crackle from the radio pulled him from sleep shortly after 2 in the morning. Ethan sat upright on the couch, one hand already reaching toward the table where he kept a flashlight. The fire had burned low. Snow pressed against the windows, driven sideways by a storm that had arrived faster than forecast. The radio released another burst of static. No voice followed. Ethan crossed the room and adjusted the dial by less than a fraction. The frequency remained unchanged. "Nothing," he said quietly. The words sounded too loud inside the cabin. His gaze moved toward a framed photograph lying face down beside the radio. He did not need to turn it over to know what it showed. Daniel Cole stood in that picture, beside him on an airfield in Afghanistan. Both brothers younger, and still wearing flight gear. Daniel was 35 now, 4 years younger than Ethan. Tall and narrow through the shoulders, with sandy brown hair, light hazel eyes, and a crooked smile that made strangers trust him quickly. Unlike Ethan, Daniel filled silence with conversation. He remembered birthdays, learned the names of ground crews, and could calm frightened survivors before the helicopter touched down. But Daniel's easy manner had changed after a rescue crash killed 2 members of his crew 6 years earlier. He remained friendly, yet became relentless whenever someone he loved began withdrawing. He believed isolation was another form of injury, and that Ethan had been bleeding in private for too long. Their last conversation had ended badly. "You're not investigating the crash," Daniel had told him over the phone. "You're building a prison around it. You don't know what I'm doing. I know you stopped answering anyone who might make you come back." Ethan had ended the call. That had been 11 months ago. The radio went quiet again. Several miles away, Sheriff Maya Brooks was still awake in her office above the small county station in Winthrop. Maya was 37, compact and athletic, with dark skin, sharp brown eyes, and black hair pulled into a practical braid. She rarely raised her voice because she had learned that calm questions made dishonest people more uncomfortable than shouting. Her father had been a state trooper who died when Maya was 17, leaving her with a permanent distrust of reports written too neatly after chaotic events. An unmarked envelope lay open on her desk. It had been delivered without postage, pushed through the station's side door sometime after sunset. Inside was a copy of the original search map for Flight 72 Kilo. Maya spread the map beneath her desk lamp. Several sectors were marked in red, showing where official teams had searched. One basin north of Frostline Pass remained completely unmarked. Someone had drawn a dark circle around it. Beside the circle, 3 words had been printed in block letters. Ask who removed it. The location was labeled Grey Wolf Basin. Maya compared the map with the final search report stored in the county archive. On the official version, Grey Wolf Basin did not exist as a separate search sector. The boundary line curved around it, joining 2 neighboring areas and creating the appearance that the entire region had been covered. It had not. Maya reached for her phone, hesitated, then searched for Ethan's number. Before she could call, the storm knocked against the station windows hard enough to shake the glass. At Ethan's cabin, something struck the lowest porch step. He turned away from the radio. For several seconds, he heard only wind. Then came a slower sound. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Ethan pulled on his boots, took the flashlight, and approached the front door. He opened it only a few inches. Snow rushed through the gap. A German shepherd stood beyond the porch light. The dog was large but severely underweight, with black and tan fur crusted in ice. One ear stood upright, while the other folded slightly near an old tear. A pale scar crossed his right shoulder. Blood darkened the fur around his left hind leg, and exhaustion made his body tremble. Still, the shepherd did not lower his head. He watched Ethan with focused amber eyes. Then the distant thump of a helicopter passed somewhere beyond the storm. The dog recoiled instantly. His body dropped close to the ground. His ears flattened, and a broken growl rose from his chest. Not aggression, but terror shaped by memory. The helicopter faded. The shepherd remained frozen for several seconds before slowly lifting his head. Only then did Ethan notice what the dog carried between his teeth. It was a torn length of blue backpack strap, stiff with ice and darkened by old dirt. 2 white initials had been stitched into the fabric. N.B. Ethan stared at them while the silent radio hissed behind him. Noah Bennett. The shepherd stepped closer and placed the strap on the porch. Then he looked past Ethan toward the equipment hanging inside the cabin, as though he already knew exactly what kind of man lived there. Ethan remained in the doorway, staring at the frozen strip of fabric lying between his boots. The initials N.B. were small, but there was no possibility he had mistaken them. He had seen those letters printed across Noah Bennett's equipment list, medical file, and missing person report, until they had become as familiar as his own name. The German shepherd swayed beneath the porch light. Whatever purpose had carried him through the storm was losing its fight against exhaustion. Ethan stepped aside and lowered his voice. Inside. The dog watched him without moving. Ethan tried another word, sharper and more deliberate. Come. One torn ear shifted forward. The shepherd crossed the threshold. That single response told Ethan more than the animal's scars did. This was not a stray that had once belonged to a family. He had been trained to listen through pain, fear, and distraction. Ethan closed the door but left it unlatched. The dog positioned himself near the entrance, keeping the room, the windows, and Ethan within view. Blood had frozen around the left rear paw, though the injury looked worse than it was. Ethan set a medical bag on the floor and crouched several feet away. Down. The shepherd hesitated, then lowered his body while keeping his head raised. Ethan placed a bowl of warm water nearby and waited until the dog drank before moving closer. Easy. His hands stayed visible as he cut away the ice-stiffened fur. A slice ran from the rear pad toward the ankle, probably caused by sharp stone hidden beneath wind-packed snow. It was deep enough to reopen whenever the dog ran, but there was no exposed tendon and no sign of infection. When Ethan touched the shoulder scar, the shepherd's muscles tightened. Beneath the matted fur, he felt a narrow leather cord. A flattened metal tag hung from it, scratched almost smooth by weather and movement. Ethan cleaned the surface with his thumb. One word remained readable. Atlas. So that's who you are. Atlas gave no visible response, but his eyes followed Ethan's hand as the tag was released. Ethan disinfected the wound, packed it with sterile gauze, and wrapped the leg tightly enough to protect it without restricting circulation. Atlas endured the procedure in silence. When Ethan reached for the torn backpack strap, however, the dog placed one paw over it. Ethan stopped. All right, it stays with you. He set the strap beside the rug near the stove. Atlas dragged himself close enough to rest one foreleg across it, then lowered his head. Within minutes, sleep overcame him, though his upright ear continued turning toward every movement outside. By sunrise, the storm had buried the porch steps and erased the tracks leading to the cabin. Atlas woke when Ethan approached the radio. The dog lifted his head as static moved across the old frequency, then stood, despite the bandaged leg. Ethan watched him carefully. "Search!" Atlas immediately turned toward the front door. "Guard!" The dog moved between Ethan and the entrance, body straightening despite his weakness. "Quiet!" Atlas closed his mouth and froze. The commands were not tricks. They had been reinforced until obedience became instinct. Ethan had worked alongside military and civilian search dogs before, and Atlas carried the same disciplined attention. Someone had trained him to locate people, assess danger, and remain controlled when fear would make an ordinary dog flee. The helicopter sound returned shortly after noon. It was distant, probably a utility aircraft following the valley east of Winthrop, but Atlas reacted before Ethan heard the blades. The shepherd dropped low, breathing hard, his gaze fixed on the ceiling as if expecting it to break apart. Ethan sat on the floor without touching him. "It's passing." Atlas did not understand the sentence, but Ethan kept his tone level until the sound faded. Only then did the dog's breathing slow. The reaction suggested more than simple fear. Somewhere in his memory, helicopters were connected to noise, injury, or loss. In Winthrop, Maya Brooks spent the same morning inside the county records room, where old computers hummed beneath fluorescent lights. She had scanned the anonymous map and compared it with archived search files. The visible changes were suspicious, but the digital history was worse. A revision log showed that Grey Wolf Basin had originally been listed as Search Sector 12. 6 hours before ground teams deployed, the sector had been merged with 2 neighboring zones and marked inaccessible. The change had been authorized through the account of Grant Halverson. Grant was 58, tall and powerfully built even after years behind a command desk. He wore his silver hair clipped close and carried himself with the calm authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed before he explained himself. To the public, he was a decorated former rescue commander who spoke softly to grieving families and remembered the names of fallen crew members. To Ethan, he had once been something closer to a second father. 14 years earlier, during an extraction in eastern Afghanistan, Ethan's team had been trapped below a collapsing ridge while hostile fire closed the only safe route. Grant had ignored an order to withdraw, brought a damaged helicopter into the valley, and held it beneath unstable air long enough for Ethan and 2 wounded operators to climb aboard. A piece of shrapnel struck Grant's left arm during the rescue, leaving him with a slight stiffness he never mentioned. Ethan had trusted him ever since, not because Grant held rank, but because he had once risked everything when leaving would have been easier. Maya leaned back from the monitor. The authorization could have been administrative, or Grant's credentials could have been used by someone else. Yet the timestamp was precise, and the altered boundary had removed the only basin hidden from the original flight path by a high granite ridge. She called Ethan. At the cabin, his phone vibrated beside the stove while he replaced Atlas's bandage. Ethan answered after seeing Maya's name. "I found something in the map history," she said. Grey Wolf Basin was removed from the search plan using Grant Halverson's account. Ethan's hand stopped against the gauze. "That doesn't mean he made the change." "No, it means his credentials did. Grant approved half the operation. His staff had access. And someone sent me that map because they wanted the change noticed." Ethan looked toward Atlas. The dog was awake now, watching the torn strap near the rug. Maya continued, "Do not go anywhere until I can get there." Before Ethan could answer, another call appeared on the screen. "Daniel." Maya heard the silence. "Who is it?" My brother.
Take it, then call me back. Ethan switched lines. Daniel did not waste time with a greeting. Tell me you're still at the cabin. His voice carried the strained patience Ethan remembered from their last argument. Daniel had always sounded most controlled when he was close to losing his temper. Why? Because a Pacific front shifted north overnight. Wind speeds are increasing over Frostline Pass, and the upper ridge could disappear by tomorrow afternoon. How did you hear I was going anywhere? Maya called County Aviation for weather data. Someone there knows I'm your brother. Ethan glanced toward the equipment wall. I haven't decided anything. You already packed the medical kit. I can hear the buckles. Ethan looked down. Without realizing it, he had begun laying gear across the table.
Daniel exhaled. I'll come up. We go together.
No.
You have an injured dog, a manipulated search map, and a storm moving toward you. This is not the moment to prove you can survive alone. I'm not proving anything. That's what you always say while doing exactly that. Atlas rose, took one of Ethan's gloves from the chair, and placed it before the door. Ethan watched him. Daniel's voice softened. Ethan, let somebody help you before this becomes another thing you carry for the next 18 months. The pass may close before you arrive. Then wait. Atlas walked to the table, caught the edge of the paper map between his teeth, and pulled it to the floor. He placed one paw over Grey Wolf Basin. Ethan felt the room become very still. I can't, he said. Daniel's reply came after a long pause. You mean you won't? The call ended. Ethan did not attempt to reconnect. He stood over the map while Atlas looked from the basin to the front door. The dog had been strong enough to leave since morning. Instead, he had remained close, conserving energy and waiting for Ethan to understand. Atlas had not crossed the mountains to find warmth. He had crossed them to find someone capable of following him back. Ethan packed antibiotics, trauma dressings, a climbing line, emergency food, thermal blankets, a flare pistol, spare ammunition, and a satellite radio. He added snow anchors, a folding shovel, and enough canine bandaging material to treat Atlas's leg twice more. Before closing the pack, he placed the NB strap inside an outer pocket. Atlas immediately nudged the pocket, confirming it was still there. Near dusk, Ethan opened the cabin door. Wind carried loose snow across the yard in thin white sheets. Atlas stepped outside, tested his injured leg, and entered the trees. Ethan followed. The shepherd moved 30 yards, then stopped and looked back. When Ethan reached him, Atlas continued. He repeated the pattern at the frozen creek, at the first steep rise, and again where the forest narrowed beneath heavy branches. He was not simply making sure Ethan remained behind him. He was measuring Ethan's pace, checking his balance, and watching the darkness around them. Atlas had come to lead him, but as the cabin light disappeared among the trees, Ethan understood something else. The dog intended to bring him back alive. Atlas moved through the trees with the steady purpose of an animal following a route carved into memory. The cabin disappeared behind Ethan within minutes, its final amber light swallowed by the storm and the dense fir forest. Snow had filled the lower woods until fallen logs became smooth white ridges and young trees bent beneath the weight. Ethan wore snowshoes now, but each step still sank several inches through the loose upper layer. Atlas chose firmer ground beneath the oldest pines, where thick branches had protected the snow from the worst of the wind. Despite his bandaged leg, he rarely hesitated. He paused only at changes in elevation, narrow crossings, and places where the landscape offered more than one direction. Each time, he studied the air, selected a path, and waited until Ethan was close enough to follow. Ethan had worked with search dogs that tracked fresh human scent and military dogs trained to clear buildings. But Atlas's behavior was different. He was not searching. He was remembering. By mid-morning, they reached the first major obstacle, a narrow gorge hidden beneath layers of wind-blown snow. A frozen stream ran through the bottom, nearly 30 feet below. The old footbridge marked on Ethan's map had collapsed years earlier, leaving only 2 weathered support posts on opposite banks. Atlas moved upstream without testing the broken crossing. Half a mile later, he stopped beside a fallen cedar that stretched across the narrowest part of the gorge. Its trunk was covered with ice and no wider than Ethan's boot. Atlas lowered his body and crossed slowly, placing each paw with careful precision. Ethan anchored his climbing line around a pine, clipped himself to it, and followed sideways. Halfway across, the ice beneath his left hand broke loose and fell into the darkness below. Atlas turned immediately. He did not bark or continue forward. He remained at the opposite bank until Ethan regained his balance and completed the crossing. Only after Ethan unclipped the line did Atlas move again. The route climbed sharply toward Frostline Pass. Wind had stripped sections of the ridge to bare stone, while other sections held deep drifts pressed against the mountain like frozen waves. Ethan noticed the first piece of blue fabric near noon. It was tied around the lower branch of a fir, faded almost gray from weather, but knotted too deliberately to be natural. The strip had been cut from synthetic material, possibly a jacket lining or emergency blanket. 50 yards farther uphill, he found another. The second strip was tied with the same compact square knot. Ethan removed one glove and studied it. The fabric was weathered, but had not been there for decades. Someone had placed it after the crash. Atlas stood beneath the branch, watching him. "These were markers," Ethan said. The dog turned uphill. The strips continued at irregular intervals. They did not form a path toward the nearest road or settlement. Instead, they led deeper into the mountain, avoiding exposed slopes and marking places where the route changed abruptly. Whoever had tied them had been conserving material. Some markers were no larger than Ethan's thumb. Others had been secured high enough to remain visible above winter snow. They suggested planning, repeated travel, and the possibility that someone had survived long enough to learn the terrain. At the same time, Sheriff Maya Brooks drove 20 miles south of Winthrop to a small ranch house beside the Methow River. The property belonged to Owen Mercer, the retired emergency coordinator who had supervised county radio traffic during the original search. Owen was 66, short and broad through the chest, with thinning white hair and heavy eyebrows that made him appear irritated even when he was calm. Years of night shifts had left deep shadows beneath his pale blue eyes. He had once been known for remembering call signs, weather codes, and exact transmission times without consulting a log. Since retiring, however, he had avoided every public discussion of Flight 72 Kilo. He opened the door wearing an old thermal shirt and suspenders, then looked past Maya toward her patrol vehicle. "You came alone?" "You asked me to." "I asked because I didn't want a parade in my driveway." Inside, Maya placed the anonymous map on his kitchen table. Owen's expression changed when he saw the circle around Grey Wolf Basin. He sat without being asked. "You recognize it," Maya said. "I recognize what's missing." Owen walked to a cabinet and removed a battered notebook wrapped inside a plastic freezer bag. During the search, he had kept handwritten copies of significant transmissions because the county recording system occasionally failed in extreme cold. On the 4th night after the aircraft disappeared, he had received a signal on a secondary emergency frequency.
The transmission lasted less than 7 seconds. A woman's voice, Owen said, weak, broken by static. She said, Bennett, then something about a ridge and running water. Claire Bennett? I believed so. Why wasn't it investigated? Owen stared at the notebook. I reported it to Halverson.
He said aircraft interference from a Canadian survey team was bouncing off the mountains. Told me to classify it as an unidentified signal and keep the search channels clear. Did you question him? Once. And? He reminded me that false signals had already sent 2 teams into avalanche terrain. He said another mistake could kill rescuers. Owen's voice hardened, but not with anger toward Maya. It carried the shame of a man who had rehearsed the same defense for 18 months and no longer believed it. I wrote what I was ordered to write. Maya photographed the page. Why tell me now? Because somebody sent you that map. And because I heard a woman say her name while the official report claimed there had been nothing but static. Farther east, Daniel Cole sat alone in the weather office of a private aviation hangar near Spokane. He had used an old contact to obtain archived atmospheric data from the night of the crash. 3 monitors displayed wind direction, icing levels, and radar returns over the North Cascades. Daniel's long frame was folded awkwardly into a chair designed for someone smaller, and his sandy hair stood up where he had repeatedly dragged his fingers through it. The friendly ease he showed flight crews was gone. When he concentrated, his face became unexpectedly severe. The official report placed the aircraft south of Frostline Pass before it disappeared. But the recorded upper-level winds would have pushed a damaged plane northeast, away from Blackwater Lake. Daniel adjusted the model twice and reached the same result. Even with engine loss and severe icing, the aircraft could not have descended where the final report claimed, unless the flight data had been altered. He called Ethan. No signal. He tried again. The call went directly to voicemail. Ethan, the lake conclusion was wrong, Daniel said. Not uncertain, wrong. The wind would have carried them north of Frostline. Call me as soon as you hear this. On the mountain, Ethan had no service and no knowledge of Daniel's discovery. He and Atlas had reached a steep traverse beneath an ice-covered cliff. The slope appeared stable, but Ethan noticed a hollow sound beneath his snowshoes. Wind had formed a crust over empty space where snow extended beyond the rock. Atlas moved 3 steps ahead, then stopped so suddenly Ethan nearly collided with him. The shepherd turned, seized the cuff of Ethan's jacket, and pulled backward. The snow in front of them collapsed. A wide section broke away and fell into a hidden ravine, carrying ice, branches, and several feet of packed snow into the darkness. Ethan dropped to one knee on solid rock. Atlas scrambled backward, but his injured paw slipped between 2 stones. The dog twisted free with a sharp cry. Blood immediately darkened the bandage. Ethan pulled them behind a rock outcrop and opened the medical kit. The cut had reopened along the lower edge. He cleaned it, applied clotting gauze, and wrapped the leg again, while Atlas watched the route ahead. We turn back if you can't carry weight. Atlas stood before Ethan finished speaking. He tested the paw once, limped 3 steps, then continued uphill. Ethan caught his harness cord. That wasn't permission. Atlas looked back toward the vanished route, then toward the blue fabric tied above them. A low, urgent sound formed in his throat. Not fear, refusal. Ethan released him. The climb continued until late afternoon, when the storm weakened enough for the clouds to separate. Frostline Pass opened before them as a narrow saddle between 2 granite peaks. Beyond it lay terrain Ethan had never seen on any rescue flight. High ridges enclosed a basin so completely that fog and cloud would hide it from aircraft passing even a few miles away. The final blue marker hung from a dead pine near the descent. Ethan stood beside it, while the accumulated facts rearranged themselves in his mind. The altered search boundary, the false lake theory, the ignored signal, Atlas's memorized route. For 18 months he had believed he had failed because he had missed something. Now he understood that he had been looking where someone else had told him to look. Atlas descended into the basin. Near sunset, the dog stopped beside a line of broken trees. Several trunks had been snapped at the same height, their splintered tops pointing downhill. Ethan followed the path of destruction until he saw a hard metallic edge beneath the snow. He cleared it with both hands. Blue paint appeared first, then riveted aluminum and the curved leading edge of an aircraft wing. Ethan remained kneeling beside it while darkness gathered between the surrounding peaks. Flight 72 Kilo had never reached Blackwater Lake. It had been here all along. Ethan remained beside the exposed wing until Atlas moved away from him. The German Shepherd lowered his nose to the snow, circled the broken section of aircraft, and followed a line of buried wreckage toward the trees. Ethan rose and went after him. More of the plane appeared beneath the evening light. Part of the fuselage tilted against two shattered pines. A section of landing gear twisted beneath the snow, and one propeller blade driven deep into frozen earth. The aircraft had struck the upper ridge, torn through the timber, and slid into the basin before coming to rest. There were no recent footprints around the wreck, but Atlas did not stop to investigate. He passed the damaged cabin and continued toward a darker stand of fur behind it. Ethan noticed smoke first, a thin gray thread rising above the trees. Beyond the wreckage stood an abandoned mining station built from timber, corrugated steel, and pieces of machinery left to rust decades earlier. Snow covered most of the roof, yet one ventilation pipe remained clear. Smoke drifted from its opening. Atlas increased his pace despite the injury in his hind leg. Ethan followed, keeping one hand near the flare pistol beneath his coat. Several wire traps had been placed around the clearing. They were simple but effective. Loops designed for rabbits, a weighted snare near a narrow animal path, and a line of metal scraps that would rattle if anyone approached the front entrance. Whoever lived there had prepared for hunger and danger. The warning line moved beneath Ethan's boot. Metal clattered against metal. The station door opened before the sound stopped. A boy stood inside with a homemade crossbow aimed at Ethan's chest. Noah Bennett was 16 now, though 18 months in the wilderness had stripped away much of the softness from the face Ethan remembered in the missing person photograph. He was tall for his age but painfully thin, with narrow shoulders beneath layers of repaired clothing. His dark curls had grown past his ears and had been cut unevenly with a knife. Wire-framed glasses sat crooked on his nose, one arm repaired with copper wire. His brown eyes were alert, exhausted, and far older than they should have been. His hands trembled from cold and weakness, but the crossbow remained centered. "Don't move," Noah said. His voice was low and controlled. It was not the voice of a frightened child pretending to be dangerous. It belonged to someone who had spent too long knowing that a single mistake could cost another person's life. Ethan slowly raised both hands. "My name is Ethan Cole." Noah's expression tightened. "You were on the search team." "I was." "You stopped looking." The accusation struck harder because Noah spoke without anger. He stated it as a fact. Before Ethan could answer, Atlas entered the clearing. Noah's crossbow dropped. For 1 second, the boy appeared unable to breathe. Then the weapon fell into the snow and he ran forward. Atlas! The shepherd reached him before his knees gave way. Noah wrapped both arms around the dog's neck and buried his face against the frost-covered fur. Atlas pressed his body into him, making a low sound that was neither bark nor whine. His injured leg shook beneath his weight, but he refused to move away. "I thought you were dead," Noah whispered. "I thought I sent you out there to die." Atlas licked the side of his face. Noah began crying without trying to hide it. Ethan looked toward the open doorway. "Is your mother alive?" The question pulled Noah back to the station. He wiped his face with one sleeve and retrieved the crossbow. "She's inside. She's sick." The main room had once served as an equipment office. Noah had transformed it into a shelter. Blankets and strips of aircraft insulation covered the walls. A small cast-iron stove stood near the center, connected to the repaired ventilation pipe. Shelves held labeled jars of dried roots, fish, and carefully measured grain. A narrow channel cut through the floor carried water from an underground spring into a metal basin. A small generator coughed in the corner. Its casing had been removed, exposing a network of scavenged wires and aircraft components. One wire ran to a single bulb hanging above a cot. The weak yellow light illuminated Claire Bennett. Claire was 41, medium height and naturally slender, though illness had reduced her body to sharp lines beneath several blankets. Her chestnut hair had been cut near her shoulders and streaked with premature gray. Her brown eyes, once composed in government photographs, were clouded by fever, but still intensely aware. A deep intelligence remained in the way she studied Ethan before accepting his presence. Even weakened, she carried the guarded authority of someone accustomed to challenging people more powerful than herself. A wound above her left hip had been covered with clean cloth, but red staining had spread beneath the bandage. "Who is he?" Claire asked. "Ethan Cole," Noah said. "Atlas brought him." Claire's gaze moved toward the dog. Relief softened her face for the first time. "You came back," she whispered. Atlas approached the cot and placed his head near her hand. Claire rested her fingers against his scarred shoulder. Ethan opened his medical kit. "How long has the fever lasted?" 4 days, Noah answered. "It gets worse at night." "The wound?" She cut it on sheet metal when the roof supports shifted. Ethan removed the bandage carefully. The cut was narrow but deep, and the skin around it was red and swollen. Infection had spread beneath the surface, but there was no black tissue or sign that it had reached the bone. "Do you have allergies to antibiotics?" Ethan asked. "Penicillin," Claire said. "Severe." Ethan selected a different medication, cleaned the wound, and began preparing an injection. Noah watched every movement. "What are you giving her?" Ethan showed him the label. "Ceftriaxone. Different drug family, but I'll monitor her closely." "How quickly should the fever change?" "If the infection responds, we may see improvement within 12 to 24 hours. Noah nodded once, memorizing the answer. Beside the cot lay a notebook filled with compact handwriting. Ethan opened it only after Noah allowed him. Each page recorded the date, outside temperature, remaining food, generator fuel, Claire's pulse, fluid intake, and the condition of the traps. The entries became more crowded after the wound occurred. "You kept all of this?" Ethan asked. "If I didn't write it down, I started guessing. Guessing wastes food." Ethan looked at the generator. "You repaired that?" "The starter motor came from the plane. The The regulator is from a survey drill outside. It only runs 4 hours a day. There was no pride in Noah's response. To him, the repair was not an achievement. It was simply another thing that had needed to work. Claire explained that the pilot, Aaron Pike, had survived the initial crash. Aaron had been a 52-year-old civilian pilot with a heavy build, a graying beard, and the patient manner of a man who never rushed frightened passengers. He suffered internal injuries and died 6 days later. Before his death, he recorded a statement on an emergency audio device. Noah retrieved a weatherproof recorder from a metal box. He did not play it. He said we shouldn't trust anyone connected to the changed flight plan. Ethan felt the words settle into the room. Claire asked Noah to bring a sealed container from beneath the floorboards. Inside was a black external drive wrapped in plastic and foil. "This is why our plane went down," she said. Before the flight, Claire had been investigating Helix Ridge Resources, a mining corporation contracted to restore contaminated federal land. Her water samples showed that the company had instead buried industrial waste inside a protected wilderness corridor. The drive contained laboratory results, internal payment records, photographs of disposal sites, and a list of officials who had accepted money to approve false environmental reports. "I sent copies to 2 people," Claire said. "One disappeared. The other withdrew his statement and left the country." "Why take Noah on the flight?" Ethan asked. "I didn't know the transport had been compromised. I believed moving together was safer than leaving him behind where someone could use him against me." Noah looked toward the floor, but did not contradict her. For 18 months they had survived by using emergency food recovered from the aircraft, water from the underground spring, fish from the basin, and traps Noah maintained along the tree line. During the first summer, they attempted to leave twice. A flooded canyon blocked one route, and a rock slide destroyed another. Claire's worsening injury ended their final attempt. 9 days earlier, their last antibiotics had run out. Noah had tied the NB strap around Atlas's neck and sent him away. "I trained him to follow the old markers," Noah said. "I thought he might find the search road." "You gave him your name," Ethan said, "so someone would know he belonged to a person." His voice tightened. "But the storm came early. I should have stopped him." "If you had," Ethan said, "your mother might not survive this infection." Noah looked at him. "You made the only decision that gave her a chance. Atlas understood the job." The boy's shoulders lowered slightly. It was not forgiveness, but it was the first crack in his guilt. Ethan asked him to help organize the supplies. Noah immediately calculated their remaining food, generator fuel, and the weight Claire could safely carry if they moved later. Ethan listened instead of dismissing him. The wilderness had forced Noah to become a mechanic, hunter, medic, and caretaker. Treating him only as a child would ignore the person who had kept both himself and his mother alive. Outside, darkness closed over the forgotten valley. Atlas lay between Claire's cot and the door, his head resting on Noah's boot. The aircraft remained beneath the snow, and the mountains still separated them from the world. But for the first time in 18 months, the Bennett family was no longer alone. Claire's fever had fallen by less than a degree when Ethan checked her shortly before dawn. It was not enough to call the treatment successful. But her pulse had slowed, and the redness around the wound had stopped spreading. Noah sat beside the cot with his notebook open across one knee, recording every number Ethan gave him. Atlas lay near the stove with his bandaged leg extended, his eyes moving between Claire, Noah, and the door. Outside, wind passed over the mining station in long, low waves. The abandoned building creaked beneath the pressure, and loose metal rattled somewhere near the roof. Ethan had spent most of the night studying the basin on his map. Claire was too weak to cross Frostline Pass at the pace he and Atlas had maintained. Remaining at the station, however, carried its own danger. The survivors needed medicine, evacuation, and a team capable of moving Claire without worsening her condition. Ethan took the satellite radio from his pack. "I need to call someone who can organize an extraction," he said. Noah looked up immediately. "Who?" "Grant Halverson." Claire's eyes opened. "No." Her voice was weak, but the warning inside it was unmistakable. Ethan paused with his thumb near the power switch. "Grant commanded the original search. He can put an aircraft in the air faster than County Rescue. His name is on the drive." Ethan looked toward the black external drive resting inside its waterproof wrapping. "In what context?" "Payments, authorization records, meetings with Helix Ridge executives." Claire pushed herself higher against the cot despite the pain. "I never proved what his role was, but his name appeared too often to be coincidence." Ethan felt the old instinct to defend Grant rise before reason could stop it. 14 years earlier, the man had flown into hostile fire to save him. Grant had visited injured crew members in hospitals, called their families personally, and carried the names of the dead in a notebook inside his uniform. Ethan had measured leadership against him for most of his adult life. "His name may have been used," Ethan said, "or the payments may have been connected to an authorized contract." "That is what people say when the person in the document is someone they want to trust." Claire held his gaze. "Do not tell him exactly where we are." Ethan considered the storm, her infection, and the limited medication in his bag. Waiting for certainty could cost Claire her life. He turned on the radio. A satellite connection appeared after several attempts. Grant answered on the emergency command channel with the same controlled voice Ethan remembered from countless operations. "Cole?" "Yes, sir." "Where are you? County officials say you entered Frostline alone." "I found the aircraft." Silence followed, brief but complete. "Repeat that." "Flight 72 Kilo is in a hidden basin north of the pass. Claire Bennett and Noah are alive." Noah moved closer to his mother. Grant's breathing remained steady through the speaker. "Their condition?" "Claire has an infected wound and needs evacuation. Noah is stable. I also have the search dog that located them." "Give me your coordinates." Ethan looked at Claire. "The satellite lock is unstable. I can provide a general approach from the western ridge." He transmitted coordinates several miles south of the mining station, near the entrance to the basin rather than its exact center. Grant accepted them without questioning the discrepancy. "Stay where you are," he said. "I'll organize a recovery team." Atlas rose suddenly. The German shepherd's ears flattened as Grant continued speaking. A low growl moved through his chest. Ethan had heard Atlas react to helicopters, but this was different. The dog approached the radio with his body rigid and his lips drawn back. "Keep the survivors contained and secure anything recovered from the aircraft," Grant said. "Do not transmit through county channels. This remains under federal authority." Atlas barked sharply and struck the floor beside the radio with one paw. Noah caught the leather cord around his neck before he could lunge closer. "Atlas knows that voice," Noah said. Ethan ended the transmission. The station became silent except for the generator's uneven hum. Claire looked at him. "What did you tell him?" "Enough to reach the basin. Not enough to walk directly to this building." "That may still be too much." Noah retrieved the waterproof container and removed the drive. "Then we destroy the payment files." Claire stared at him. "No." "Not all of it," Noah said quickly. "Only the names and the part connected to us. If they think the evidence is gone, Maybe they stop following. Claire's face tightened with a pain unrelated to her wound. People downstream are drinking poisoned water. Families are getting sick without knowing why. I know. Then you know why your father and I refused to leave it buried. Dad isn't here. Noah's voice cracked. Aaron isn't here. Atlas nearly died because I sent him out. I'm not losing you because of files on a hard drive. Claire reached for him, but Noah stepped back. For 18 months, he had measured every choice against whether it would keep his mother alive one more day. The drive represented danger that could not be trapped, repaired, or rationed. Ethan understood why destroying it felt like action. Noah, he said, what did Aaron ask you to do before he died? The boy looked toward the metal box holding the pilot's recorder. He told me to get the truth outside the valley. Did he tell you to die for it? No. Then those are not the only two choices. Ethan placed the drive on the table between them. We protect the evidence, and we protect each other. Neither one requires sacrificing the other, but from now on, nobody makes that decision alone. Claire studied him, then looked at Noah. He's right. Noah's hands closed into fists. You always say the evidence matters more. I said it mattered. I never said it mattered more than you. Claire extended her hand again. This time, Noah took it. Ethan's radio vibrated against the table. The incoming channel was encrypted through the county emergency network. Maya's voice came through in a whisper. Tell me you did not call Halverson. Ethan looked at Atlas. I called him. Maya released a slow breath. Then listen carefully. Owen Mercer confirmed Claire transmitted after the crash. Halverson personally ordered the signal logged as interference. I also recovered the original digital boundary file. His account removed Grey Wolf Basin from the search map. Credentials can be copied. The flight route was changed through the same administrative authority 6 hours before takeoff. Ethan felt the room narrow around him. Do you have proof Grant made the change himself? Not yet, but I know what he did after your call. Maya's tone hardened. He did not contact County Search and Rescue. He did not request a medical helicopter. He hired a private security contractor called Blackwell Response and gave them temporary emergency clearance to enter the mountain. Ethan turned toward the covered windows. How many? The contract lists 4 field personnel. No medic, no avalanche specialist, no rescue equipment request. Claire closed her eyes. Noah moved the drive back into its protective wrapping. Maya continued. They are not coming to evacuate an injured woman. How long before they reach the western ridge? Weather may delay them, but their vehicles left Winthrop 20 minutes ago. Can you stop them? Not without exposing what I know, and Halverson still has enough authority to override county restrictions. I'm working on it. The connection weakened. Ethan, move before they arrive. The radio went dead. 200 miles away, Daniel stood beside a rescue helicopter inside the Spokane hangar, while a mechanic removed the engine covers. He had intended to fly toward Winthrop at first light, but an electronic notice had appeared across the regional aviation system. Temporary flight restrictions over Frostline Pass, issued under emergency federal authority. The order claimed unstable weather and classified recovery operations. Daniel read the authorization twice. The approving office belonged to Grant Halverson. He called Ethan again and reached only the satellite voicemail. Grant closed the airspace, Daniel said. Whatever you found, he does not want anyone else reaching it. Do not trust the rescue team. At the mining station, Ethan did not receive the message, but he had reached the same conclusion. He spread the basin map across the table. The western approach was compromised. The aircraft wreckage would reveal that survivors had remained nearby, and the smoke from the station could be seen once the storm lifted. They needed a route that avoided open ground and led away from the coordinates Grant had been given. Noah pointed toward a series of narrow lines drawn along the northern wall of the basin. There's an old drainage tunnel behind the storage shed. It connects to the lower mining road. Ethan looked at him. How stable? The first section is reinforced. After that, I don't know. We stopped using it when part of the ceiling shifted. Can Claire make it through? Noah considered the width, slope, and distance rather than answering from fear. With support. Slowly. Ethan nodded. Then you show me the entrance. He divided their equipment into 3 loads. The drive, pilot's recorder, antibiotics, and emergency radio remained with him. Noah packed food, generator batteries, cord, and the detailed survival records. Claire wanted to carry the drive herself, but Ethan refused until she could walk without swaying. Atlas stood when Noah lifted the canvas pack, although blood had begun showing through the dog's bandage again. Ethan replaced it one final time. You found help, he told the shepherd. Now help us leave. Outside, the storm had weakened to a fine, steady snowfall. Ethan extinguished the stove, covered the generator, and scattered cold ash across the floor to make the station appear abandoned. Claire looked around the room that had kept her and Noah alive through 18 months of winter, hunger, and waiting. She did not say goodbye. Noah placed one hand on the wall beside the cot, then picked up his crossbow. Somewhere beyond the surrounding ridges, men hired by Grant Halverson were already climbing toward the valley. Ethan opened the rear door of the mining station and looked into the darkness beyond it. The call had been made to the wrong man. They would not remain long enough to pay for that mistake. The rear door of the mining station had barely closed behind Ethan when the distant whine of engines reached the valley. He stopped beneath the storage shed roof and listened. The sound came in uneven waves as machines climbed through deep snow beyond the western ridge. Claire leaned against Noah, her face pale beneath the hood Ethan had given her. The antibiotics had slowed the infection, but the fever continued draining her strength. Atlas stood beside them with his head raised and his body rigid. A growl formed in his chest before the first snowmobile appeared. Ethan looked toward the drainage tunnel entrance. A rusted metal grate covered a black opening beneath the shed. Noah had already removed 2 bolts, but the lower hinge remained frozen. "We need another minute," Noah whispered. "We may not have one." 4 snowmobiles entered the basin in single file. The riders wore bright red rescue jackets, with reflective strips across their shoulders. From a distance, they looked like exactly what frightened survivors would hope to see. The man leading them was Victor Rains. Rains was 46, tall and thick through the chest, with a shaved head, a square jaw, and a pale scar running from his right eyebrow into his hairline. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to entering rooms already expecting obedience. A former military contractor, Rains had built his reputation by completing difficult assignments without asking whether the official explanation was true. He was patient when patience served him, but behind that control was a ruthless belief that witnesses were simply problems with voices. The other 3 men spread out as soon as their engines stopped. Ben Harlan dismounted last. He was 34, lean and long-limbed, with sandy hair, tired green eyes, and a face that seemed more suited to a schoolteacher than an armed contractor. Ben had worked as an emergency medic before joining private security after his younger brother died during a failed evacuation overseas. That loss had made him suspicious of confused chains of command, though financial pressure and loyalty to former teammates had kept him accepting assignments he did not always understand. Beside him stood Cole Mercer, a broad, bearded man in his early 40s who carried a rifle across his chest and rarely spoke unless asked a direct question. The fourth contractor, Travis Dane, was 29, shorter and restless, with narrow features and quick hands that constantly checked his equipment. Travis treated danger like a competition and followed Rains because certainty was easier than judgment. Rains removed his goggles and examined the wreckage before looking toward the mining station.
"Ethan Cole," he called. "Grant Halverson sent us. We're here to extract the survivors." Atlas stepped forward and bared his teeth. Noah stared through a crack beside the shed. His breathing changed. "You know him?" Ethan asked. "The bald one," Noah whispered. "He was at the airport before we left. He opened the luggage compartment." "Ground crew?" "No, he had no uniform. Aaron told him to get away from the plane." Ethan looked again at Rains. The rescue jackets were clean. None of the men carried a medical evacuation sled, trauma bag, avalanche probe, or equipment for moving an injured patient. They had come dressed for rescue without bringing the tools to perform one. Ethan placed the external drive and Aaron's recorder deeper inside his pack. "Get the grate open. Stay out of sight until I return." Claire caught his sleeve. "You cannot face 4 armed men alone." "I'm not facing them. I'm buying Noah time." He returned to the front of the station with Atlas beside him. The dog limped, but his growl became louder when Rains approached. Rains raised one hand. "Easy. We're on the same side." "Where's your medic?" Ethan asked. "Waiting at the western approach." "And the evacuation sled?" "Weather forced us to leave heavier equipment behind." Ben looked toward the snowmobiles. His expression tightened. No medical team was waiting behind them. He knew because he had checked the route himself. Rains continued. "Halverson said Claire Bennett may be confused and resistant. We need to secure her before moving." "She has an infected wound," Ethan said. "She can't be restrained." "Then let us evaluate her." Atlas lunged one step forward. Ethan caught the leather cord at his neck. Rains studied the dog. "That animal could become a problem." "He responds to threats." "Then keep him controlled." Ethan allowed several seconds to pass before stepping aside. "Claire is in the rear room. Noah won't leave her." Rains signaled Travis and Cole to circle the building while he entered with Ben. Ethan followed them inside, keeping his movements calm. The cot remained beside the stove, covered with blankets shaped around supply bags to resemble a person beneath them. Noah's medical notebook lay open on the table. A cup of warm water still released steam. Rains approached the cot and pulled the blanket back. Empty. His expression did not change, but the stillness in his face became dangerous. "Where are they?" "The rear storage room," Ethan said. Rains looked at Ben. "Check it." Ben crossed the room and opened the door slowly. The space contained broken tools, mining helmets, and an old electrical cabinet. On the floor near the far wall, he noticed a fresh line in the dust where a storage crate had recently been moved. Cold air entered through a gap behind it. He understood there was another exit. Ben turned back toward Rains. "Nothing." Rains stared at him. "Nothing?" "No one." Behind the station, Noah forced the last frozen hinge loose with a metal bar. The drainage grate dropped into the snow. He helped Claire lower herself into the tunnel.
The opening was narrow and lined with old timber braces darkened by moisture. Atlas entered after her, then turned back toward the station. "Ethan will come," Noah whispered. Inside, Rains heard the grate strike the ground. He drew his pistol. Ethan drove his shoulder into Travis as the younger contractor came through the rear door. Travis struck the wall and lost his weapon. Atlas appeared from behind the shed, barking hard enough to pull every man's attention toward him. Ethan kicked the pistol beneath the stove, crossed the room, and slammed the rear door behind him. "Move!" he shouted. Noah led Claire into the tunnel while Ethan lifted the grate back into place. Atlas entered last. Ethan pulled the storage crate across the opening from inside, leaving the station moments before boots struck the rear wall. The tunnel descended gradually beneath the mining compound. Water ran along a narrow channel between the rails once used for ore carts. Claire stumbled after the first 100 yards. Ethan caught her before she struck the wall. "I can keep going," she said. Her breathing was too fast, and sweat had soaked the hair near her temples despite the cold. "If we push too hard, you collapse. If we slow down, they catch us." Noah looked between them. "There's a maintenance chamber ahead. We can rest behind the pump housing. The tunnel splits after that." Ethan nodded. "You lead. Steady pace." He chose safety over speed, shortening Claire's steps and supporting most of her weight when the ground became uneven. Every delay increased the chance of pursuit, but forcing her faster would turn a mobile survivor into someone they could no longer move. At the station, Rains found the tunnel entrance within minutes. Travis recovered his pistol and demanded permission to enter immediately. "Not until we know where it exits," Rains said. He opened an encrypted phone and called Halverson. "They left through an old drainage system," Rains reported. "Cole is assisting them. The woman and boy are alive." Halverson's voice remained calm. "Recover the drive and the pilot's recording." "And the survivors?" A pause followed. "No witnesses can reach a public agency." Ben stood close enough to hear the order. Until that moment, he had been told Ethan was unstable, Claire was confused, and Noah was being moved against his will. Now the assignment had lost every remaining disguise. Rains ended the call and ordered Travis to activate the tunnel mapping unit. The handheld device used archived mining surveys and short-range positioning beacons to calculate the drainage route. Ben accepted the unit before Travis could take it. While Rains examined the tracks near the entrance, Ben opened the rear casing and loosened one power contact with the edge of his knife. The screen flashed twice, displayed an incorrect tunnel branch, and shut down. "Battery failure," Ben said. Rains swore. "Fix it!" "I'll need a few minutes." Those minutes were the only help Ben could offer without exposing himself. Outside the basin, Maya Brooks drove a county patrol vehicle across the narrow access road leading toward Frostline Pass. Her deputy, Lucas Ward, followed in a second truck carrying portable barriers. Lucas was 31, sturdy and red-haired, with a calm rural manner that caused people to underestimate him. He had grown up near Winthrop and knew every logging road in the county. Maya trusted him because he asked questions before drawing conclusions and never confused a badge with permission to stop thinking. Together, they parked both vehicles across the road and placed signs warning of avalanche danger. "Halverson can override this closure," Lucas said. "Only if he is willing to create a public record of doing it." "And if his people come down anyway?" Maya checked the rifle secured beside her seat. "Then they explain why a private security team entered a restricted mountain without rescue equipment." At the Spokane hangar, Daniel finished inspecting his helicopter despite the flight restriction. Snow struck the hangar doors in heavy bursts, and the wind gauge remained above safe operating limits.
He loaded emergency fuel, medical supplies, and a rescue basket anyway. The chief mechanic warned him that the storm made departure impossible. Daniel looked toward the dark runway. "I'm not leaving yet." "Then why load the aircraft?" "Because when the weather gives me 10 minutes, I don't want to waste 9 of them preparing." Beneath the mountain, Ethan guided Claire into the maintenance chamber Noah had described.
Atlas stood near the tunnel entrance, listening to faint impacts echoing from far behind them. The hunters had found the passage. Ethan checked Claire's pulse, tightened the straps on his pack, and looked toward the 2 tunnels leading deeper beneath the ridge. They had escaped the station. They had not escaped the men wearing rescue jackets. The maintenance chamber offered 2 ways out, but only one climbed toward the northern slope. Noah identified it by a faded survey mark painted on the tunnel wall. The passage had once carried electrical cables from the mine to an abandoned fire lookout above the basin. Ethan chose it because Rains would expect them to continue downhill toward the old mining road. The tunnel rose sharply through the mountain, narrowing until Claire had to turn sideways between the timber supports. Her fever had returned, and each step demanded more strength than the last. Ethan kept one arm around her waist while Noah moved ahead with a lamp, made from the generator battery. Atlas stayed behind them, stopping whenever distant voices echoed through the tunnel. The dog's injured legs shook, but he refused to be carried. Nearly an hour later, the passage ended beneath a rusted maintenance hatch. Ethan forced it open with the pry bar, and freezing wind rushed down around them. They emerged on a steep mountainside above the tree line. Through blowing snow, the silhouette of an abandoned fire lookout stood on a narrow ridge several hundred yards away. The lookout was a square wooden structure raised on heavy supports, with windows on every side and an external staircase coated in ice. One corner leaned slightly toward the valley, but the main frame remained intact. Ethan helped Claire climb while Noah and Atlas followed. Inside, they found a rusted stove, a collapsed cot, weather charts scattered across the floor, and an emergency transmitter mounted beneath the observation desk. The radio unit had been designed to broadcast wildfire warnings across several public frequencies, but the power cables ended in a dead battery bank. Noah removed his gloves and opened the transmitter housing. His fingers were red from cold, yet they moved with the same precision he had used to repair the generator. "The radio still has dry components," he said.
The battery is the problem.
Ethan placed the equipment from Noah's pack across the floor. 2 weather station batteries, copper wire, the aircraft regulator, several fuses, and a hand crank charging unit. Noah examined everything, then began building a temporary power circuit. Claire watched him from beside the stove. "He learned half of this after the crash," she told Ethan. "The other half he taught himself because I couldn't." Ethan looked at the boy working beneath the weak beam of the lamp. "He didn't just survive the valley," he said. "He kept it running." Below the ridge, Rains reached the maintenance chamber and found the northern passage. The broken positioning unit had cost him nearly 40 minutes, and his patience had hardened into suspicion. He ordered Cole Mercer and Travis Dane to continue upward while Ben remained behind him. Ben had stopped pretending the mission was legitimate. He had heard Halverson's order clearly, and the image of Claire's empty cot remained in his mind. The people they were hunting had not kidnapped anyone. They had escaped because armed men in rescue jackets had arrived without medicine. As the group approached the tunnel exit, Ben quietly removed the magazine from his rifle, checked it, and returned it to place. He no longer knew whether he would need the weapon against Ethan or against the men beside him. At the lookout, Noah connected the final wire. The transmitter released a low hum. One indicator light flickered, disappeared, then returned. "It won't hold long," he said. "Maybe 5 minutes." Ethan handed him Aaron Pike's recorder and the external drive.
Noah connected both through an old data interface, using the aircraft regulator to stabilize the current. He selected the public mountain rescue frequency rather than any private federal channel. The transmission began with Noah's voice.
He gave his full name, Claire's name, the crash location, and the coordinates of the fire lookout. Then he played Aaron's final recording. The pilot's exhausted voice filled the small room, describing the unexplained route change, the man who had accessed the luggage compartment, and the warning that the flight had been compromised. Noah followed it with copies of Claire's laboratory results, payment records from Helix Ridge, and the authorization codes linked to Halverson's office. The data moved slowly, but enough escaped the mountain to reach every receiver listening on the emergency network. At the roadblock below Frostline Pass, Maya heard Noah's voice through the patrol radio. Lucas Ward turned up the volume while state police dispatchers began requesting confirmation from multiple stations. Search and rescue volunteers in Winthrop heard the same recording. So did County Aviation, 2 fire departments, and a state emergency coordinator monitoring the storm. In Spokane, Daniel stood beside his helicopter when Aaron's recording entered the hangar frequency. For 18 months, officials had treated the crash as a closed tragedy. Now the missing boy was speaking live from the mountain, and the pilot was naming the altered route. Halverson could no longer control who possessed the evidence. Maya contacted state investigators and ordered Grant Halverson detained before he could leave the county or destroy records. She transmitted the location of Blackwell Response's vehicles and identified Raines's team as armed suspects posing as rescuers. At the same moment, Daniel saw the weather monitor change. A narrow break had opened between 2 storm cells over Frostline Pass. It might last 10 minutes, perhaps less. He climbed into the pilot's seat and started the engines. The chief mechanic stepped onto the landing skid long enough to shout that the winds remained above recommended limits. Daniel looked toward the opening in the clouds.
Recommended isn't the same as impossible.
The mechanic released the skid. Daniel lifted the helicopter into the snow. The lookout transmitter died after 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Noah tried the switch again, but the temporary circuit had overheated. "Enough went through," Ethan said. A rifle shot shattered the western window before Noah could answer. Ethan pulled him to the floor. Raines and the contractors had reached the ridge. Cole Mercer fired from behind a rock outcrop while Travis moved toward the staircase. Ethan returned fire with the flare pistol, sending a burning round into the snow near their position. The sudden light forced both men back. Atlas barked from beneath the observation desk. Claire held the drive against her chest and remained low beside the wall. Raines called through the storm. "Send out the drive and the boy. You and Claire may still walk away." "No one believes you now," Ethan shouted. "They will believe whatever survives." Ben stood 10 yards behind Raines. "You said this was a recovery." Raines did not look at him. "It is. You were ordered to kill them. You heard an operational instruction you were not cleared to interpret." Ben raised his rifle. "I understand it well enough." Raines turned slowly. Cole and Travis hesitated, uncertain which weapon to follow. Ben moved closer to the lookout. "Ethan Cole, my name is Ben Harlan. The mission was staged. We were told you had abducted the survivors. Halverson ordered Raines to recover the evidence and leave no witnesses." Raines fired first. The bullet struck Ben's shoulder and spun him into the snow. Ethan rushed from the doorway, dragging Ben behind one of the lookout supports. Noah followed with a medical pouch despite Ethan's order to remain inside. Together they packed the wound while Claire covered them from the doorway with Noah's crossbow. Raines moved around the ridge, trying to reach the tower from below. Ethan intercepted him near an overhanging shelf of snow. They collided on the narrow slope, striking each other with gloved fists and elbows. Rains was heavier, but Ethan used the incline, forcing him toward the edge. Noah emerged to pull Ben farther into shelter. Cole raised his rifle toward the boy. Atlas launched from the staircase and struck Cole's legs, knocking the weapon aside. Travis backed away, unwilling to fire at the dog or the teenager. A deep crack traveled beneath the ridge. Ethan recognized it immediately. "Move!" he shouted. The snow shelf broke loose. The mountainside collapsed in a wide, white sheet. Ethan pushed Rains toward exposed rock, then turned toward Noah. The avalanche struck before he reached him. Snow swept Ethan and the boy downhill, burying both beneath several feet of packed debris. Rains caught the edge of a broken tree root, his body hanging above a ravine. Ethan's hand emerged briefly from the snow, close enough to reach him. He could have let go. Rains had helped destroy the flight, hunted Claire and Noah, and tried to kill them at the tower. Instead, Ethan caught the strap of Rains's rescue jacket and secured it around the exposed root. "Hold that," he said, before the shifting snow pulled him under again. Claire stumbled onto the slope, calling Noah's name. Ben, pale from blood loss, pressed one hand against his shoulder and used the other to help her search. Atlas ran across the debris field with his nose close to the surface. He stopped once, dug, then moved again. Near a broken pine, he began barking with a force that shook his exhausted body. Claire and Ben dug beside him until they uncovered Noah's hand. The boy was conscious but unable to move beneath the compressed snow. They freed his shoulders, then followed the position of his arm toward Ethan, who had curled his body around Noah to create a small breathing space. When they pulled Ethan free, Noah gripped his coat. "You came back for me." "That was the job," Ethan said, struggling to breathe. Noah shook his head. "No, that's what a rescuer does." Above them, the storm shifted. The beating of helicopter blades rolled across the ridge. Daniel's aircraft appeared through a narrow opening in the clouds, fighting the wind as it approached the damaged lookout. Its searchlight swept over Claire, Noah, Atlas, Ben, and Ethan. For the first time since the plane disappeared, help was coming from someone they could trust. Daniel brought the helicopter through the opening in the storm with its nose angled into the crosswind and its landing lights sweeping across the damaged fire lookout. Snow spun beneath the rotors, erasing the ridge in white bursts. The slope was too narrow for a full landing, so Daniel held the aircraft several feet above the ground while the rescue basket was lowered. Ethan helped Ben reach it first. The wounded contractor had lost enough blood to weaken his legs, but he remained conscious and immediately surrendered his weapon. Claire went next, wrapped in a thermal blanket with the drive secured beneath her coat. Her fever had climbed again, and she barely had the strength to hold Noah's hand before the basket lifted her toward the helicopter. Noah refused to board until Atlas was secured in a canine rescue harness. The German shepherd resisted the straps, frightened by the noise of the aircraft, but Noah pressed his forehead against Atlas's and kept speaking until the dog stopped trembling. Ethan entered last. Before climbing into the cabin, he looked toward Rains, who remained tied to the exposed root above the ravine. State rescue crews approaching from the lower ridge would reach him shortly. Ethan had saved the man's life, but he did not offer forgiveness. That would belong to another day, if it ever came. Inside the helicopter, Daniel kept both hands on the controls while the aircraft dropped beneath the cloud layer. At 35, he still had the tall, narrow frame and sandy brown hair Ethan remembered, but exhaustion had sharpened his features. His hazel eyes remained fixed on the instruments, and the familiar crooked smile was absent. Daniel had always seemed lighter than Ethan, more willing to speak, laugh, and trust other people. The death of 2 crew members years earlier had changed him, however. Since then, he had refused to let silence hide a dangerous decision. That stubbornness had driven the brothers apart, but it had also brought him through the storm. "You ignored a federal flight restriction," Ethan said through the headset. Daniel glanced at him. "You ignored weather, an armed recovery team, and basic instructions about staying alive." "Fair. That is the closest thing to an apology I've heard from you in 11 months. Ethan looked toward Claire, Noah, and Atlas. "I should have answered your calls." Daniel's expression softened without losing focus on the controls. "You should have. I thought if I stayed alone long enough, no one else would have to carry what happened." "That isn't how family works." Ethan nodded. This time, he did not argue. They landed at a secured medical facility outside Winthrop, where Maya Brooks and state investigators were waiting. Claire was taken directly into surgery to clean the infected wound. Noah refused to leave the treatment room hallway until a nurse confirmed that his mother was stable. Atlas received antibiotics, stitches, and treatment for exhaustion. When the veterinarian finally allowed Noah to see him, the boy sat on the floor beside the recovery kennel and slept with one hand resting through the bars. Ben survived the gunshot wound. During questioning, he gave investigators the complete Blackwell response briefing. The route Raines had ordered them to follow, and Halverson's command to recover the evidence and eliminate the witnesses. Ben did not claim innocence. He admitted entering the mountain armed, helping pursue the survivors, and waiting too long before resisting. His cooperation, the damaged tracking device, and his actions at the lookout later earned him a reduced sentence. More importantly, his testimony connected Halverson directly to the attempted killings. Halverson was arrested before sunrise. Maya found him inside his regional operations office, feeding files into an industrial shredder. He wore a pressed white shirt with the sleeves rolled carefully to his elbows, as though destroying evidence were merely another administrative task. Several hard drives had already been removed from their cabinets, but state officers recovered them from a locked case near the rear exit. Halverson asked to speak with federal authorities and claimed the search team had been sent to protect classified information. Maya placed him in handcuffs without debating the explanation. The investigation lasted nearly a year. Flight records proved that Helix Ridge had paid contractors to damage the aircraft's navigation system and manipulate the route into severe icing conditions. Digital logs showed Halverson's authority had been used to remove Grey Wolf Basin from the search map, suppress Claire's emergency transmission, and create the false conclusion that the plane had fallen into Blackwater Lake. Financial records revealed years of payments to officials who approved fraudulent environmental reports, while Helix Ridge buried chemical waste beneath protected land. The evidence Claire carried led investigators to contaminated wells serving several rural communities. Families who had been told their illnesses were unrelated finally received medical testing and compensation. Claire recovered slowly, walking with a cane for several months before regaining full strength. When she testified, she did not present herself as fearless. She described fear as something that had accompanied every decision from the moment the plane began losing altitude. Courage, she told the court, was continuing while fear remained. After the trial, Claire created the Bennett Water Recovery Fund to finance independent testing, medical treatment, and legal support for families affected by industrial pollution. She kept the organization small enough that every case could be examined personally. The work did not erase what happened in the valley. but it gave the suffering a direction. Noah returned to school 1 semester later. Crowded hallways and constant noise overwhelmed him at first. He sat near exits, checked every classroom window, and carried emergency batteries in his backpack. Rather than hiding those habits, he used them. With support from a science teacher, he founded a youth emergency radio club that taught students how to operate public rescue frequencies, build temporary antennas, and respond during wildfires or winter power failures. The repaired generator from the mining station stood on a shelf in the club's workshop. Noah never repainted its scratched metal casing. To everyone else, it looked like an outdated machine held together with scavenged wire. To him, it was proof that broken things could continue working when someone refused to abandon them. Atlas was formally retired from active search duty. The old scar across his shoulder and recurring pain in his rear leg made long missions unsafe. He lived with Claire and Noah in a quiet house outside Winthrop, where he slept near Noah's bedroom door and watched Claire whenever she worked late. Still, retirement did not keep him away from Ethan. Ethan accepted a position training mountain search and rescue teams across the North Cascades. He taught route verification, survival tracking, canine coordination, and independent review when official data conflicted with physical evidence. Atlas attended shorter training sessions, demonstrating scent work and victim location to young handlers. The moment a training vest appeared, his age seemed to disappear. Months later, Ethan and Maya returned to the trailhead below Frostline Pass. Together, they installed a wooden memorial for Aaron Pike, the pilot who had kept the damaged aircraft in the air long enough to save Claire, Noah, and Atlas. The plaque carried no government language and no mention of Helix Ridge. It simply said that Aaron had remained at his post when others depended on him. Ethan stood beside Maya after the final bolt was tightened. He should have been brought home sooner. So should all of them, Maya said. Ethan looked toward the mountains. We cannot change that. No. But we can change what happens the next time someone reports a signal everyone else wants to call static. The following winter, Daniel and Ethan flew their first rescue mission together in years. 2 hikers had become trapped above a frozen canyon after one suffered a broken ankle. Daniel held the helicopter steady in difficult wind while Ethan descended on the cable. Their movements returned easily, but something between them had changed. Ethan no longer treated accepting help as weakness, and Daniel no longer used anger to force his brother to speak. They trusted each other again, not because the past had disappeared, but because they had finally stopped pretending they could survive it separately. In early spring, Claire, Noah, and Ethan drove to a small overlook facing the North Cascades. They did not return to Grey Wolf Basin. The wreckage had been removed, Aaron's remains recovered, and the contaminated sites sealed under federal supervision. There was nothing left in the valley that required another sacrifice. When it was time to leave, Claire opened the passenger door. Noah climbed into the rear seat, carrying the old generator's repaired control panel for his radio club. Ethan stood beside the driver's door. Atlas remained on the snow. He looked at Claire, then Noah, and finally Ethan. Only after all 3 were safely inside did the German Shepherd jump into the back seat and settle between them. Ethan watched him in the mirror as the truck turned away from the mountains. Atlas had crossed Frostline Pass to find a rescuer. He had led Ethan to 2 people the world had already abandoned and refused to leave until everyone was ready to go home. But Ethan understood the truth now. Atlas had not merely found the survivors. He had brought all of them back to a family. Sometimes God does not answer us through thunder or miracles that shake the sky. Sometimes He sends a wounded dog through a snowstorm, places one faithful person at the right door, and reminds us that no life is ever truly forgotten. Atlas crossed the mountains to save Claire and Noah. But perhaps he was also sent to rescue Ethan from the prison of his own guilt. In the end, they did not survive because one person was fearless. They survived because each of them refused to leave someone else behind. What would you have done if you were Ethan? Would you have trusted the commander who once saved your life? Or believed the warning of a wounded German shepherd? And do you think Atlas found Ethan by instinct, or was God guiding every step through the storm? Share your thoughts, prayers, or a story about an animal that changed your life in the comments below. Your experience may be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Warm Light Tales. More powerful stories of loyalty, courage, faith, and second chances are waiting for you. May God bless you, protect your family, and send faithful hearts to walk beside you whenever the road grows cold.